I'm going to call the General Purposes Committee meeting to order. And you've got the agenda. I'm suggesting we add something to the agenda, which would be a referral to staff on Trutch Avenue and the possible renaming. If that's okay, may I have a motion on the agenda with that change? Moved and seconded. Discussion on that. All those in favor? Any opposed? Well, that's carried. All right, so the first thing on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting of the GP meeting, May 17th.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded. Any comments, questions, errors, or omissions? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Next meeting, as you know, is June 21st. The delegation we have, Jacqueline Geeson, Project Director for the Social Purpose Real Estate Collaborative. Yes, ma'am. Now, if you could introduce yourself, and delegations are given 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks for your time. It's a great pleasure. I've had the opportunity to work with folks in Richmond over many years, and it's a pleasure always to be here. So I work for the Social Purpose Real Estate Collaborative. We are a true collaborative of funders and investors that work to help nonprofits and social enterprises and artists with their real estate needs. We've just completed a major study into the issues surrounding space for community, space for nonprofits, and I wanted to share with you some of the results of that study. And you'll see it has relevance to Richmond because the City of Richmond is a member of the SPREE Collaborative. This study was done by SPREE and the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. There we go. So just to set the context, what is the issue? Vancouver, once again, is in the unfortunate situation of being one of the second least affordable housing market in the world. We know that spreads across to communities like Richmond, all of the metro communities, but also the Vancouver Island and parts of the interior. We know that nonprofits and social enterprises and small businesses are all impacted by that lack of affordability, and that we are facing some very significant loss of community spaces where we find the services and the programs that we as citizens, as visitors, as employers need for our resilient communities. This gives you just a quick little snapshot into what we consider social purpose real estate. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's starting to become more common in our language. And basically, it is any property that is being used by a nonprofit, a social enterprise, and artists in order to deliver programs and services. What we know is that space that is affordable is a reasonable price, whether it's renting or owning it, space that is suitable, space that works for the purpose it's intended, that is secure for the long term, and is sustainable for the organization, not just environmentally, has impact. Those are spaces where nonprofits deliver their programs and services and where cities like Richmond and citizens benefit from those services. Okay, now, there we go. So quickly, who is SPREE and what do we do? This is a slide that shows you all of the members of the collaborative. We have been working together since 2009, and the City of Richmond has been a member for the last couple of years. We essentially are funders and investors seeking to mitigate the impacts of the real estate market on nonprofits in our communities, where we see the risks to those nonprofits through the spaces that are being lost. Space for Community was a study, as I mentioned, done in collaboration with the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. It was BC-wide, led by the 6 municipalities, and included a massive research report, an online survey, a variety of workshops and events. And I would like to thank Leslie Sherlock, who is part of our webinar this coming Wednesday on community serving spaces addressing displacement and loss. Richmond was the second largest participant in the Space for Community survey with 12%. Vancouver, as is no big surprise, was 43%, but we had a very broad array of participation across other municipalities in British Columbia. And you can see the columns on the right side show you the kind of categories of spaces. 4 different types of space. This is the second study that SPRE has done, the first in 2013. There are 4 issues that we looked at, the first being affordability, noting that affordability affects everyone. And it is a very complex web. It is a web of what are the rental leasing situations that nonprofits find themselves in? What are the costs to acquire property? What are the costs of construction to do tenant improvements? What are the facility operating costs? And then, of course, things like property tax. We had approximately 50% of the respondents note that they were in some form of subsidized or donated space. And that subsidy might have just been a lower market rate, or it might have been a nominal lease. And it made a huge difference. Tenure. Tenure is one of the really critical issues in the affordability challenged areas of British Columbia, like Richmond, Vancouver, Victoria, where without long-term tenure, it is impossible to invest in your community, in your programs, and in the space. And you can see some of the top challenges. We have almost 50% of the respondents with agreements expiring in 1 year. That is a huge vulnerability for the sector. Suitability. Sometimes people say, well, you know, just move to some of the cheaper areas. We know that cheap space often equals poor space, and it is also the space that is often under threat of redevelopment or eviction. We also know that from the survey, 93% of the nonprofits talk about how important location is near clients, audiences, transit, other affiliated organizations. For 80% of artists and community social services, the space does not meet their needs. After the 2 years of research report and the survey, which occurred last fall, we have 16 recommendations that have been broken out. And I think essentially the way to sum it up is think differently. Increasing the supply is just not good enough. We need to have different models of ownership and control to ensure that that increased supply actually gets used for the purpose it's intended. We know that the sector is a powerhouse. The nonprofit charitable sector is the 3rd largest contributor to GDP in Canada. It is a larger employer than fishing, funding, forestry, hunting combined in British Columbia. We know that we can fund and finance in different ways, but it seems that we always fall back to the most basic, and it doesn't work for the nonprofit sector. And we also know that we need to create an enabling environment. As I mentioned, there are 16 recommendations that cut across all sectors, but they have been grouped so that there's some targeted direction towards social purpose, towards funders and investors, towards local government, and towards real estate. And the ultimate idea here is turning anecdote into evidence, making an impact, and making a difference.
Ma'am,
I don't have very much.
Ma'am, you're really out of time here. If you could wrap it up, please.
I will do that exactly right now. So what I was going to say is I don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to go into each of the recommendations. Just to give you a quick snapshot, that is the social purpose sector. This is for funders and investors. This is for government. And this is for the real estate sector. And I just want to acknowledge the funders for the Space for Community project. And I also want to acknowledge the City of Richmond, which is doing some really interesting leadership work in your policies in arts, culture, and heritage, and community and social services. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. And maybe what we could ask you to do is to make available the slides that you've presented, and so that, because they're fairly descriptive and we can each go through them more analytically. We've got a couple questions. One from Councillor Steves.
I was wondering, we went through this in Richmond, goodness knows, about 20 years ago when land was cheaper, and we approved a number of live-work studios for artists, where the artists lived upstairs and the studio was downstairs. The prices went up dramatically, and I have no idea if those studios still exist or not, or if they're rented out to somebody different downstairs than upstairs. Do you know anything about those issues? There was one at London's at the foot of 2 Road, and several others throughout Richmond.
I'm afraid I can't speak to the specifics of the status of Richmond properties. I was aware that there had been some really great work done in that regard, and I'm sure your staff would be able to update. It is, though, one of the critical things. I was explaining tenure. So just creating the space is not good enough. We have to make sure the space stays available to the nonprofit, to the artist sector in the long run. And they do disappear, and Vancouver had that very, very problem.
Exactly. The places we put them were in low-cost areas at the time, but now everything in Richmond is high cost. So I'm somewhat concerned that they probably don't even exist any longer, but we'll find out.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a few questions for the delegate, and then probably a few questions to staff, if not a referral after that. First off, thank you for coming and presenting. I was part of the Richmond Community Services Advisory Committee a few years back, and at the time they were working through a space needs assessment. Were you aware of that document that they produced?
I was very aware of it because it was largely based on our 2013 rent and zone study that we created. Yeah, very good work.
Great, thank you. The second question is, I'm going to ask a couple questions about some of your slides because I saw them so briefly. Sometimes a slideshow like that is provided in our agenda package ahead of time, so apologize, and I'm sure it'll come back as based on the comment that Mayor Brody made about that. My first question is, could you provide just an example of an education organization that provides that non-profit, not-for-profit service in Richmond? Because we have, like, the school district has a charity number. We have schools that I think are for-profit. So could you just give an example of an educational group?
Sure. It's a good question. And there is a lot of data and a lot of information to convey. So we are not looking at the formal education system. We are not surveying schools, universities, colleges, or private institutions. We are looking more at education, employment training, nonprofits that get involved in the interstitial areas around formal education systems. I'm not familiar with all of your nonprofits and social enterprises in Richmond. I can tell you we do feature Richmond Caring Place on our website in one of our case studies, but I'm not familiar with all of yours. But there are quite a few social enterprises that are now dedicated to education and employment training and skill development, and that would be an example of the kind we're talking about.
Okay, Councillor Wolf, one more question, and then we're going to move on.
I had two more, just two more. My next one was about the comment there on thinking differently and models of ownership might be something different. Could you comment on? I believe one of the things you mentioned specific for Richmond was that 48% of the leases will be up in the next year. Was that one? Did I say that correctly? And was there another statistic about the data for Richmond that stood out to you?
So what I presented to you just now is the general data for the full Space for Community study, not the Richmond specific data. You did see the number 12% was the second highest participation rate, but we didn't go into the exact Richmond data. I think it's probably best that your staff are the ones to help interpret that for Richmond. There are, I would say that every one of the 6 municipalities that participated shares equally in the interest in the recommendations. And I can tell you that Richmond's, the top 3 recommendations for Richmond, I can tell you that, if you give me one moment. But the ownership models that we're talking about are secured ownership by nonprofits themselves, by co-ops, by foundations, that's a very important, and by government, so that they're not subject to what happens in the private sector market. I'm sorry, I don't have those statistics exactly in front of me, but the Richmond statistics can come to you, obviously, out of the study.
Great. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I won't comment more on it right now, but thank you. My last brief question, I think it was your third last slide, and you mentioned this is the list for governments to do action, and then there was like 3 bullet points, and I was just staring at the first one, and then it changed. Could you just read what the bullet points were for that?
We're going to get copies of the slides, so you'll have it.
But I might want to make a referral, and I just want to get what their brief. It was really short. It was like 10 words, I think.
I'll do it super fast. Prioritize community space in development, whether it's private sector or government. Improve municipal land use policies, and that's everything from zoning to navigating city hall to the whole environment. And create a supportive property tax environment.
Great. Thank you so much.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report, and thank you for giving us a hard copy too. That was great. Does the group, as you just read out those 3 points that Councillor Wolf asked for, do you broker relationships between cities and some of these organizations that are prepared to give back to the community?
That's a really good question. So we find that we don't have the ability to play that brokering role because we would never get around to doing the research, the advocacy, the policy advice. But we do on our website have kind of resources and recommendations for how to find partners and how to find space, how to find funding. And we do provide advisory services for nonprofits that do own property and are looking to how to redevelop it, how to partner, how to include in a mixed use kind of capacity housing, those sorts of things. So we provide it indirectly, but no, as an actual partner brokering role, that would use up all of our time, and we never actually get to solving the big picture.
Would you be able to send us a list of potential partners that might be willing to work with the City of Richmond? Because we've got a lot of projects that could be coming down the pipe, and if that's all you do is just give us a list of potential partners, that would be helpful.
I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to do that because it is very site specific. It's very much about, so I used to be the senior planner for cultural infrastructure for the City of Vancouver, and I was always working with the developers, the nonprofits, the funding, financing organizations, and it's really finding the nexus of common interest, opportunity, timing, relationships. So I wouldn't be able to send you a list, but I think your staff probably will have some sense of that, and certainly through the Spree table, they're well connected to all of the various funders and investors.
Thank you.
Councillor McPhail.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the delegation. Well, thank you for your presentation, and I think my questions have, been asked. Like, we need to get a copy of the presentation, and so Richmond-specific data. Does our staff have the full report then?
Yes, so the full report has all the aggregate data across all of the municipalities, and then it also broke it out into the individual municipalities. And so that data is available. There's an opportunity to do some deeper dive looking at the subtleties of the data, but that certainly is available and in their hands.
All right, thank you. And Your Worship, can I ask a question to our staff?
Yes?
So through you to our staff, are you looking at the report then, and we will be getting something in the fullness of time?
To Councillor McPhail, certainly we
Can't hear you.
Oh, my mute.
Speak up. Speak up.
Can't
I think what she said was, yes, in the fullness of time, we will get the report. Yes, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to ask a question to staff as well, if they are able to, and it was just to follow up. So I have no more for the delegation, but thank them kindly. So my question was maybe like a response to that. Is there a direction to staff already? Is there referrals where the partnership and staff are available to go through the data that was just received and to help support our advisory committee and other reports coming to staff? Is that assured already, or are there needs for direction now? Thanks.
Liesl or Leslie? Somebody?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Yes, we will certainly be taking a closer look at the data and reporting back to council about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so to the delegation, thank you very much for being here. Very interesting. We'll look forward to receiving the package that you're going to send to us with the materials that you presented on screen. So thank you. The next item on the agenda is the application to amend the liquor license. We have two people from the applicant who are available just to answer questions if there are any. There's Bert Hicks and Dallas Worthington. So to staff, do you have anything to add to the report?
I have nothing to add to the report.
All right. Someone want to move it? So it's moved and it's...
Move the recommendation.
Yeah, it's moved and seconded. Yes, Councillor Day.
Staff, I understand that the drinking area will be expanded to the bowler sitting area. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, that is correct.
Perfect. Good. Well, obviously there's no noise concerns because they're far away from everybody. But is there any concerns about safety? Because, you know, people are bowling and they're running back and forth, and in terms of, you know, drinking and playing at the same time, is that anything that anyone, either through the Brewing Pub Corp, is worried about, or any thoughts about that?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, I don't have any comment on that. That's not one of the criteria that the city is asked to look at. We do, you know, the city's role is to look at potential concerns for noise and impact to the community, and then if satisfied, turn it over to the liquor board to make determinations through their licensing process about safety and patron behavior and things like that. Not sure if the applicant could offer anything, but it's not one of the criteria that we necessarily look at for our process.
We could ask that to the delegation, please, Mayor Brody.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes?
I love this technology. This establishment's been licensed since 1997, and we've not had any issues or problems. And what we're trying to do is license this facility comparable to other bowling centers where the bowlers playing area is licensed, so someone can have a beer with a hot dog while they're bowling. And it's fairly similar to a golf course in that respect, where the playing surface of golf course is licensed. With me is Dallas, of the applicant. And Dallas, do you really want to add on that point? That the demographics of bowling tend to be an older crowd, and it's very, you know, it's an ag liquor service as an added amenity. The focus is not like a bar where you go in and primarily consume alcohol. It's the primary focus, like a golf course or any other recreation center, is on the bowling activity, and liquor is just merely an added amenity. we don't do huge sales of alcohol. It's just an added amenity. We want to be competitive with other bowling centers in British Columbia.
You know, it sounds like a lot of fun. I'll probably be your first customer.
Well, come on down once we can all do that again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're going to call the question then on the motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. The third one is the referral that I've asked to be added to the agenda. In the last week, there's been a lot of publicity in relation to the name Trutch, which is apparently a street name in Vancouver and in Victoria, at least. And we find that there's a Trutch Avenue in Richmond. What it turns out is that we have Trutch Avenue. It's in the Terra Nova area. It was named given that name in May of 2002. It's in the Terra Nova area. It was the name of a former lieutenant governor, and that apparently in Terra Nova, that was the theme, was the various lieutenant governors. But apparently there's been various suggestions that this gentleman had quite a challenging past, and so that, you know, it's a question as to whether we should be using that name. Now, apparently this road is only 200 meters long. There's only about 20 houses on it. So my suggestion is that, and I'll move that we refer this to staff, the question of Trutch Avenue and the possible renaming of it, asking staff to analyze the situation and to provide options. And also, while we're doing that analysis, staff would be directed to notify the residents of Trutch Avenue, 20 residents or so, notify those residents of this analysis so that this isn't going on without them having some direct input or knowledge of it. So that's my referral motion.
Second.
Okay, so that's moved and seconded. Councillor Steeves. Harold?
Yeah, thanks. I support the referral. I was only thinking about it. I think that we should consider some of the people in Richmond that were dispossessed, not exactly like the children at the schools. Believe it or not, our schools were integrated. When I went to school at Lord Byng, I had Japanese girls, First Nations girls and boys, all in our class together. We were totally integrated, and we didn't have this problem. But we discriminated for decades against Japanese people when they were evacuated in World War II. And it seems to me, choosing one of we've got many names of Japanese pioneers like the Sakai family, who was a major fisherman, a lead fisherman at Steveston in the 1920s and 30s that towed fishing boats out to sea, was shipped away and then came back and carried on. A lot of people like that we could replace Trutch with. I think it would send a message. I think that in the future we need to find some of the First Nations names as well, and my suggestions are, and I've suggested this before, that we should be renaming Gary Point Park and Imperial Landing, but that can come later. But I definitely think we should look at some of the people that were badly dealt with to replace Trutch.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's get to the bottom of the situation first. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to staff. I do support this referral, but perhaps there's more that could be put to it. I have forgotten that Trutch was a road in Steveston. In Terra Nova. I don't think I've been down. I know I've passed it before. But perhaps the city staff know of other roads that have been talked about in other areas of British Columbia recently or longer ago that had significant challenging pasts. Was the phrase. So perhaps we can put a second one forward.
No.
So we're educating the public around names of roads. Maybe there's two that can happen at the same time.
Councillor Wolf, that is not the motion. I'm not opening up Pandora's box here. We want to specifically look at Trutch. what are the implications? What's the situation? What should we do? That is the motion. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting this. I think it's a good idea. I think it's timely. We do have, if we want to stay with the theme of lieutenant governors in BC, Stephen Point, who is Native, served from 2007 to 2012. So we may consider that as the replacement name. So if we're looking as this is part of a Indigenous reparation, replacing it with someone whose name is Indigenous who did in fact serve that role may make sense.
Yeah. All right, Councillor Steves.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I've been trying to think of how to name for the Point family. We can't rename Gary Point because that's where they got their name, but renaming that street for the Point family would be a good idea. The other suggestion I was going to suggest is that years ago during World War II, Zellweger Road was renamed Dover Road or something like that, and discriminated against because they were German family, even though they were patriotic to Canada. And we've never replaced the name for Zellweger Road as well. So there's some good ideas, but I really like the idea of naming it for the Point family.
Okay, I'm sure that staff has heard those sentiments. Councillor Day.
Thank you. When we're finished with this motion that's on the floor, I'd like to make another motion that we ask if it's possible, if a street, the people who live on a particular street really, really don't like their name, can they come to the city as a unified front of 95% residents and change the name of their road? Because there are a lot of really horrible names in Richmond, and I'm sure people would love to have a more normal name if they could.
Well, without agreeing with the idea that there's horrible names in Richmond anywhere, I can tell you that if you get a certain consensus on your street, you can ask that the name be changed. We've been through that a couple times. For instance, Quilchena Golf Course wanted the end of Granville Avenue to be renamed Quilchena. It didn't fly, but it's possible to do it. There's costs, there's implications, you have to have consensus, etc. But it can be done.
I did not know that. Thank you for the education.
Yeah. So I'm going to call the question on this referral on Trutch Avenue to staff. All those in favor? Anybody opposed to that? All right, so that is carried. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Move adjournment.
Okay, we're now adjourned, and if you give us a second, we'll go into the next meeting, which is Finance Committee. So I will call to order the Finance Committee. May I have a motion on the minutes?
Move minutes.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. July 5th is our next meeting date. So then we've got a number of informational reports from various aspects of the city. We've got the first quarter to March 31st.
Move the recommendation.
So that's moved and seconded. To staff, is there anything to add to your report?
Nothing to add.
Certainly have been some interesting trends in the last year, I've got to say. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Capital projects, active capital project information for the first quarter. Let's get a motion then on it.
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. To staff, Mike Jing, Jenny Ho, anything to add to your report?
Nothing to add, Your Worship.
All right, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. Just through you to staff. One question is about infrastructure highlights. This is on page 40 of our report, and it mentions the at the bottom there in the table for a sanitary works program, Hamilton Sanitary Pump Station. This is the work that happened at the corner of Smith and Willett, and I believe the pump station was all completed officially during this quarter. That's why I'm bringing it up. And just to what is the procedure, I guess, or are staff already aware and are working towards it? When a project like this went in, 2 old cherry trees were removed to do the works. But since then, over the end of the winter, and you can tell by leaves not coming out, 3 more of those old significant cherry trees have died, and they're in amongst the few. I think there's almost more dead ones than live ones now. So how are those being addressed? Because these areas were just finished being worked on, and everything was just graded nice. But the tree roots must have been severed during some of that work. So are we learning from that? I know many people they're looking forward to this time of year when the blossoms come out, and many people I've talked to their whole life they've gone to see these trees in bloom, and now there's so few of them, and there's a bunch of dead ones still standing there. So do we learn from these capital projects, and in a way that we can try and replace them with similar type trees instead of just a little stick in the ground that will never make it to that standard again? Do we? Yeah. I've just heard a lot of frustration on this.
Councillor Wolf, first of all, I'm going to let staff answer that. But this report is to talk about the progress that's being made. There's hundreds of projects, and the purpose of this report is not to go into the details on each and every one of them. So we'll ask staff if they have any answer to that, but please bear that in mind. And when you do have those detailed questions, either take them to committee or take them to staff directly. Milton or Mike?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, I'm not familiar with this, the trees that you're specifically referring to. In general, for capital projects, we follow the city's guidelines to protect trees, and we work with park staff and other staff to identify proper compensation for any trees that are damaged during the course of construction.
Thank you. Then, Mike, just a final comment. Then you don't need to follow up with a question on that specific item. But I just feel that the synergy between our departments will help to bring more success in all regards. So this truly was a highlight. The work was done, and I think the support for the community to get their vehicles in and out, because Gilly Road was blocked off. So there was a lot of complexities to these matters, and I'm sure all of the projects in here are. I'm just trying to point out some of the learning, and I brought it up here because many members of the public didn't want to use this platform to speak, but they wanted to be able to hear that it was brought to your attention. So thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. On page 42, we have under parks, the key park project. And halfway down is the dog park upgrades 2021. And I noticed that the adjusted budget was $200,000, and then the actuals was actually, as of March, nothing. So I'm wondering if there's some flexibility in that budget to potentially create a dog park, a small one in Hamilton.
Just a minute. I'm going to stop that right now. Same remarks as with Councillor Wolf. If you've got a favorite project that you want to ask about, you should take it to committee or you should take it to staff directly. We can't go through 200 different projects and talk about the details of them. This is to talk about the progress that has been made.
So in this case, no.
Sorry?
In this case, no progress. The actuals were zero. So, okay, I will call staff and ask. I thought the rest of the community might be interested because we have had letters from people in Hamilton, but that's okay. I will talk to staff.
All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. FIN 65, we have the budget process.
So moved.
Moved and seconded.
Second.
Mike Ching, Jenny Ho, or other staff, anything to add to this?
Nothing to add, Your Worship.
Okay, so it's a beginning of a long process. Councillor McPhail.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. Earlier this afternoon, I received a call from a member of the public who thought it was too late to send in an email regarding this agenda item. So he asked me to ask a couple of questions. And the questions were, where could he find policy 3106? He read in the report how council policy 3106, the overarching policy on how we go forward, but he couldn't find it on our website. So is that available to the public to have a look at, and where is that found?
Through the chair to Councillor McPhail, all policies should be available online. However, if they can't find it, we'd be more than happy to forward that to council-approved policy to the resident.
Yeah, you could forward it to me. I couldn't find it either. I was on our website and I couldn't find it either. So maybe you could just send me the link. That'd be great. And then the other question he asked was, is the process going to be different given the 2 years that we've had? So last year and, as we are into this year with COVID, is staff taking a different approach at looking at things? Will there be a deeper dive, I guess is the question, given how we know there's been impacts to the community and we don't really know how it's going to come out this year because, the light is getting brighter at the end of the tunnel, but we're not through it, the worst of it yet.
Through your worship to Councillor McPhail, I think we will consider all these items and all the external factors when we do prepare the budget. And we'll come up with assumptions and adjust the assumptions before we bring the actual budget to council and committee.
All right, thanks very much.
All right, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Then we have Lulu Island Energy, the first quarter results.
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Jerry Chong, Alan Postolka, any comments?
Nothing to add to worship. Here to answer any questions.
All right. Okay, let's call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And the final one is on the Olympic Oval Corporation. Again, it's the first quarter results. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that? All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Someone want to move adjournment?
So moved.
Okay, we are now adjourned.